data governance panel discussion, which is going to span for the next 40 minutes and give you an idea about data governance and the customer. Well, after several pendulum swings, including a sweep through free form, a self-service analytics, current research points to return to more governed data and analytics environment for improved CX. Creating a robust data governance system is important, which enables your organization to successfully execute your digital strategy. Well, we're looking at talking about the expanding scope of data. We're looking at talking about the consumer awareness and expectations. We're looking at swapping value for data. Companies should be able to make a fair exchange for their value for their data, and also designing for transparency and trust. So very exciting panel discussion coming your way. So well, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for me to welcome our esteemed set of panelists who have joined us today on the virtual platform. Well, first up, we've got Mahesh Calavai, the Chief Data and Analytics Officer, TVS Motors. Well, Mahesh is experienced in framing data strategies involving digital transformation and data governance and using the right decision-making tools for automotive, financial service, and real estate businesses of the TVS Group. Thank you so much, Mahesh, for joining us. Welcome once again.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. Well, we also have Aparna Mangari, the Head Data Science and Analytics Novartis, who's joining us. Aparna is a senior IT management professional with over 23 years of experience across various industries and experience in implementing global strategic systems integration and delivering next generation technical solutions, improving ROI and workplace productivity. Thank you so much, Aparna, for joining us and giving us your valuable time today. Aparna, you're on mute. I'm so sorry.
Sorry. Thank you for fantastic introductions, Bhavna. Excited to be here and talk about the data, and a bit surprised to look at the poll results. But yeah, I'm assuming it will change in short span.
Absolutely, absolutely, Aparna. I'll keep you posted on how the poll is evolving as well. Well, we've also got Minakshi Khuntia, the Director, Data and Analytics, GE Healthcare, joining us. Well, Minakshi is a data analytics leader with more than 10 years of experience in building big data platforms for unstructured healthcare machine data and data science digital solutions embedded within the healthcare imaging machines to provide zero unplanned customer downtime and real-time service alerts. Well, thank you so much, Minakshi, for joining us today and giving us your valuable time.
Thanks, Bhavna. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Minakshi. Well, we've also got SV Varadarajan, the VP Data Analytics, Hsbc, joining us. Well, SV is seasoned analytics consulting professional and has been in the various analytic delivery roles over the years. At Hsbc, he's applying analytics across different functions and has been responsible for driving large-scale data and analytic initiatives across the organization. So if I may call you SV, is that fine? I believe so. You're on mute. We couldn't hear you this time.
Sorry, I said that's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, SV, for joining us and giving us your valuable time. And ladies and gentlemen, this entire panel discussion is going to be moderated by Chiranjoy Chowdhuri, the Chief of Data and Analytics, Pidilite Industries. Well, Chiranjoy is a data analytics and an AI practitioner with 12 years of experience in helping large corporations to take the strategic and data-driven decisions for better outcomes. At Pidilite, he's somebody who's with the mandate to build and drive the organization's data analytics and AI agenda across all businesses and functions. Thank you so much, Chiranjoy, for joining us and being the moderator.
Thanks, Aparna. Hi, everyone.
So Chiranjoy, before I pass it on to you live, I'd just like to tell the final poll results, just in interest of the audience and everyone viewing us live. We're right now 23% at help and 78% at hinder. So this is what till now the poll results look like. Chiranjoy, over to you with your eminent panel. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Bhavna. So hello, everyone. What we have today is data governance. And what is data governance? So if you ask this question, somebody say 15 to 20 years or even 10 years ago, they would say, throw out jargons at you, such as master data management, data security, and so on. Right? This was because data was a form of record keeping maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But more and more as companies have evolved and the systems have evolved, the companies have started treating data as a strategic asset, right? Where they build value out of it and communicate this value to the customer. So what we will try and do, we will try to focus on 3 or 4 things during this, because data governance is a huge topic. What we'll try to focus is on how are we creating value for the customer using data as a strategic asset. That is number one. Number two, we'll also try to understand the data quality bit, because there are a lot of sources of data, and that is where we have a very diverse set of panelists from different sectors and forms of data and functions to try to understand what are some of the data quality issues that they face and how do they solve that. And finally, we always have to address the elephant in the room. There is a lot of privacy guidelines that are changing and evolving more and more, the compliance issues. So we'll touch upon that. And finally, we'll try to roll all of that together and try to either support or sort of challenge some of the findings of the poll that we had, whether it's a hindrance topic or a helping topic. So So the first question we will try to focus on is the data as a strategic asset and how it forms value, right? So more and more companies are talking about data being a strategic asset. So my question to you, the entire panel is, so how is data governance being implemented in your organization? Who are the key, what are the key roles in this organization who are actually backing this initiative? And what role does people, process, and technology have to play in this? So probably we can go in the alphabetic order. We can start with Aparna.
Sure. Thanks, Chiranjoy, for setting the context and the question. So I'm heading data science and analytical team for Novartis, patient safety function, right? And fixing the data is the highest priority for Novartis this year, and it is our bold objective. Until the data is not verified, that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and as well as reusable, we will not be able to unleash the potential or power of the data. So that is where the data governance plays a key role. And as you're aware, as other organizations, the data in Novartis is fragmented, right? It is in different data infrastructures, different data sources, as well as in different formats. That is, in order to accelerate digital transformation or to scale it up, it is very important to have high quality, clean, and linked data across the life cycle of that data. So in order to achieve that, at Novartis, we have established an enterprise data governance initiative, where in order to set up harmonized standards, as well as to define a clear ownership of the data. The aim here is to how can we, sorry, I'm getting a message saying that internet connection is unstable, but I'm assuming I'm audible. So yeah, just
yes, I can hear you now.
Let me know if
in the middle, but you're audible now. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Chiranjoy. So as I was saying, the aim of this initiative is how can we create the clear ownership and establish the governance bodies. Second is enrich our data users with data at their fingertips. And the third objective or key objective of this initiative is how can we curate and ingest the enterprise data assets and create the data world map so that we can have a clear insights and decision-making easy. The fourth priority, which is not the least, is how can we nurture responsible data citizens by synthesizing the importance of data governance and making them aware how data governance will help them to bring the innovative solutions faster to the patients, bring business operations efficiency, as well as to engage our patients and to have a better patient outcomes. I'll take a pause here and I'll let my peers to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Aparna. Probably we'll move to Mahesh. And Mahesh, what I would also try to understand from you is what are the different roles that the different business units are playing. It's even outside the IT in your company in TVS Motors in this entire data governance process.
Yeah, absolutely, Chiranjoy. Folks, I'm Mahesh. I look at data and analytics for TVS Motor and group companies. And per my introduction, right? So my responsibility caters to their automotive companies, financial services, and real estate businesses, right? And that context is important as we started thinking about how do we set up data management and governance. And our approach has been one of a federated structure. So there are a certain set of things that we do at a group level with the small group data management office, while the rest of what we do is federated across different companies, and within companies different functions, right? And as Aparna mentioned, the way we've approached this is by educating and elevating the importance of data within the different business functions units, right? And Chiranjoy, to your question, therefore, for in every business function in our company, we have anointed a data owner, a data steward, and a data custodian, right? And respectively, their roles ultimately the head of that function will be the data owner. So therein they understand the responsibility that they and their team have in order to manage the data that is originating in a business process. And in the central organization that we have representation from information technology, from data and analytics, from process excellence, and from the risk management functions, right? It could be a chief risk officer in the case of financial services, or a TQC function in the case of our automotive business, right? And the intention is therefore to balance both the offense, how best we can leverage data and really propel it, at the same time ensuring safety in employing it, both for our own customers, our first preference, and of course in terms of regulatory compliance and adherence. In order to make this work, the way we've done this is on the people side, really focus on education within the individual business departments, therefore elevating the overall awareness about data management, governance, and the various facets of it. We've also integrated process-wise, right? So as a business owner, as they stand up a new business model or a new information technology system, we start from that point on working backwards on, therefore, in order to make good decisions, what kind of data enrichment strategies do we need to put in place? What kind of data architecture? How do we safeguard the data? What is the life cycle of data that we need to put in place? We start from the get-go so that operationalizing that becomes easier at the end. And of course, to make all of this work, we leverage a number of technology products, right? All the way from having an enterprise data lake to specific purpose-built models for, say, model version control or data version control and the like. So hopefully that's a quick preview of what we do. Thanks.
Yeah. And to summarize, I think what you're also saying is that data owners being the business leaders as well as the use case driven and working backwards from that towards IT is probably a approach that you've been taking. Thanks, Mahesh. So next, Minakshi, and Minakshi is from GE. So I'm assuming you have a lot of rich data coming from machines and IoT platforms. So yeah, would like to hear from.
Sure, Chiranjoy. I think great insights from Mahesh and Aparna already. So with GE, I would probably be a little specific. So I've worked across different industrial businesses right now with GE Healthcare. In healthcare, really data governance is extremely critical because of the nature of the data again, right? And when we pull this kind of machine data, so these are basically a different kind of configuration logs and system logs, unstructured data that come from our diagnostic machines, right? Like the CT and the X-ray machines. So when you sweep data from these machines, it has a big risk of actually interfering with a scan. So when you are going as a patient and you're lying on a CT table and you're actually doing a scan, and someone is doing a data sweep back, it can actually interfere with the scan, and it's a huge risk to the patient lives as well. So you can understand the criticality of it. So there's a huge governance around it, hence. So first of all, for us to be able to even pull any kind of customer machine data or any kind of clinical data, there is a big process around it where we do specific data privacy impact assessments. And we have our CISO teams involved, the CISO and the business teams involved, where we do an end-to-end kind of a flow of where the data is originating from, where does it first arrive as a mount location, and from there how is it picked up and then processed, right? So the whole flow is first of all audited and approved by the CISO team and the business teams. And then we have a whole data minimization process as well. We do not store and process every data, but we only pick the data required as per our business requirements and as per our customer products as well. So that is one other quality governance that we have. The other thing I want to call out is even in our back office, in our cloud, the way we store our data, we are actually on AWS. So because of the healthcare sensitivity, we have to have a guardrails environment. And so that basically has another extra firewall and a layer of constant monitoring and security governance. So that way, that environment itself actually monitors different groups that can have access to this data and the way they even use the data, right? So our data is, there's another process I want to talk about, that's encryption. So you would have heard of encrypting data at rest and in transit, but we are also focusing on encrypting the data in use. So there's a constant monitoring in process where we look at where all this data downstream is utilized and how is it utilized, right? Is it downloadable to a customer location? So I think these are some of the key processes we have. I agree to some of the personas that Mahesh also pointed out. We have our business owners for every data element. So we have created curated data sets, and for every curated data sets, we have an entity structure and a schema structure. We have schema and entity owners. So so we have one data lake that we call across G Healthcare, and we've mashed up every diverse data element there, like, coming from enterprise systems, machines, customer data. So we have very, very structured process of who's the owner of every entity and schema. And before any business owner gets access to that data, we have an approval process where, they assess the business impact, why the data would be utilized, and where it's going downstream. So that's really a quick snapshot of what we follow within G Healthcare.
Yeah, thanks, Minakshi. And I will circle back on you on some of the sensitive data privacy topics later. Yeah. So SV, over to you. And I understand that probably banking is the most heavily regulated of these industries. So yeah, why don't you give us an overview?
Absolutely, Chiranjoy. I think like Aparna and Minakshi said, healthcare, pharma, banking, these are all one of the fairly regulated industries. And what happens is the regulation actually brings in a lot of complexity, right? Because if you're a company operating in one country or one region, the regulations are still fairly kind of, synergistic across the region. But if you are a company operating across multiple regions, the regulations are not necessarily synergistic, right? If you look at most of the European penalties, whether it is from a GDPR perspective or whether it is, you would actually see American tech giants being the ones who are probably being targeted most, and vice versa. And obviously then there are countries where the regulations are more favorable to the domestic players versus the regulations not being favorable to any of the offshore players, say like some of the Asian countries like China and others. Now if you're a global bank who operates across the spectrum of these markets, now it becomes very difficult for somebody like us to ensure that you have a regulation specific to the market, which basically means we'll need to kind of form policies or form procedures which meet the market standards across all the markets, and we'll have to kind of sometimes make it more rigid than the market level. So whatever the regulators actually insist for a market, our policies and procedures probably will be a lot more kind of rigid than that and stringent than that. The other thing that it also makes little difficult in an organization, especially when you're in a data analytics function, right, and function supporting global regions, you don't get easy access to data. And that is probably one of the reasons why I see a lot of people in the poll actually made it data governance as hinder rather than help. But I guess it is in the larger interest of the organization that we all need to understand that sometimes not giving access to data is probably more profitable than giving access to data and then paying billions of dollars in penalties and probably even losing the access to operate in the markets, right? So yes, financial industry definitely had its own share of various kind of regulatory specific evolution. And I think the good part that I would probably still say is, whether it is big data, whether it is a lot of analytics specific technologies or machine learning specific interventions, financial industry has always been in the forefront of adopting that. And possibly what had happened is, because it had been in the forefront of adopting, I mean, today we're talking about machines in the industrial era, right? We had machines in banking like way back in 60s and 70s when we got ATMs, and we kind of used to have data coming from the edge, and we used to process it at the core. So all of that we today talk is been there in financial industry for last 40-50 years. So when you are a first mover, you automatically do have certain disadvantages, and I think that's something financial industry and banking services have been really kind of adopting to fairly well.
Sure. So SV, I'll stay with you with the first sort of pillar that we're talking about data as value, and how do we communicate that to the customer so that it's a win-win for both, for the enterprise as well as the customer. So can you pick up one or two examples from your experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a best example actually lies in the financial sector itself, and it has been again there for a very long time. As I say, financial industry probably can be a good use case for many of these things. So credit scoring, all of us know, I mean, in India you have CIBIL, but there are actually equivalent agencies across the world in every country, and some global agencies, actually rating agencies, not just rate customers, but they rate companies, they rate countries for their sovereign value and all of that. Now that data is a data that kind of is bought and traded very well today with a specific value. All the organizations who ever intend to kind of operate in that industry need to have access to that data, and it is actually an initiative where all the players again contribute to enrich the data. It is not that one person owns the data. I'm sure most of us read the 2017 Economist article where economists said that data is a new oil for the 21st century. Unfortunately, what happens is, while oil as a commodity, or for that matter gold or any mineral or metal or any product or service as a commodity, can be valued very easily, data, especially if it is my personal data, if it is a kind of enterprise data, if it is a kind of an augmented data, it's very difficult to value, right? So there are companies which have made a fantastic businesses out of data. I mean, if you look at today the top 5 American companies by revenue, by market cap, every company is out there which is actually making money from data, whether it is Apple, whether it is Google, whether it is Facebook, whether it is Amazon. It is actually making money out of the data. It is making money out of the data that you generate. It is making money out of the data that your network generates. And it kind of it used to be about 4 or 5 years back, it was just the data that individual users generated, but today it is actually about making user personas of that and then selling that persona to companies. So companies are able to make kind of some kind of a value out of this. They are able to sell this to a specific price. But then what is missing out here is, as an individual, when my data is there, am I actually getting the value from that? So it is about a fair share, right? Everybody has to have a fair share in that game, and that's only when that industry, that kind of business model will kind of succeed for a longer run. And that's exactly where I think we can see a lot of regulations coming in, a lot of discussions kind of going through, whether we see the regulations like CCPA of California, or whether we kind of look at GDPR for Europe, or the Osaka track that the G20 kind of got started off, or the Gaia X that it was actually started by Germany and France. Other than that, now Europe, and in fact most of the big companies, high-tech giants, have kind of at least given their interest in being part of that initiative. I think these are the initiatives that really will define how the data can be valued. But we do have very few use cases, as I said, the CIBIL score or the credit scoring, but there is a huge economy out there. And if we don't get the right value, right valuation of data, I think what we are looking at, a digital economy or infonomics kind of a generation with 13 trillion potential that we speak about, isn't going to be easily materializing.
Yeah. So to Aparna, so we move from banking to pharma, and would again like to understand a similar topic of how are you generating, communicating value to the customer, and also some of the second, third party data, for example, the CIBIL score example that SV took. in the pharma parlance.
Sure. Thanks, Chiranjoy. So as we has mentioned, right, data governance, people do understand, management do understand that it is an imperative. But still we ask for what is the value it is creating by establishing the data governance, and to have the MDM implementation, or it's a huge effort and cost associated with it. Right. The first primary activity which we have to do is we have to bake in, while we are establishing the data governance framework itself, we have to bake in how we are going to convert the quantitative and qualitative benefits of data governance to show that value which it is generating. For example, when I talk about the pharma industry, right, the value generation of qualitative benefits of having the data governance in place is to have a rich, high quality data, right? And second, this enables us to be compliant and go back to the regulators with the right kind of set of data when it is asked. And this is not only about the short term, but in long term, it will avoid any fines or any inspection findings which we have during the drug development, or when the drug is in market, right? We can avoid a lot of mishaps to happening. And the third, the advantages, how can we take the decisive decisions in a short span of time? So these are the qualitative benefits which we can easily convert into that ROI concept, but we need to have a clear framework in place. Apart from that, when I come back to the quantitative, the approach we have used at Novartis is we have digital lighthouse projects where we want to, like one of the project looks at asset connected ecosystem, right? How can we engage our patients and creating the AI-based devices to capture the metrics of the patients well in advance. These kind of insights would help us to not only shorten the span of the drug development, but how can we engage our patients more efficiently? So these are the values which we can convert and sensitize our leadership on that, or the end users on the importance.
Yeah, any couple of examples from the data quality? How have you worked on improving data quality from your legacy data or your current data? Maybe one or two specific examples.
Sure. Maybe I can share a few best practices and take the analogy which SV has mentioned, right? Data is considered as a new oil, right? For any AI or machine learning models, is dependent, learns from data, predicts from data, reasons from the data. And in my view, without the quality, the data is like a crude oil, use of good for no use, right? And that is where, in order to convert that crude oil to a fuel, that is where the data quality plays a major role. And some of the best practices which we are using at Novartis, maybe I can share few, right? One is how we are tightly integrating the data quality, DQM management into our data governance, enterprise data governance initiative, which I was talking about, right? When we are establishing the standards or master processes, how we can ensure the quality throughout the life cycle of the data, not just for the data for which it has been created or produced, or for just for that purpose, right? But beyond that, to ensure the quality at enterprise data level. The second, the best practices, maybe as Mahesh, we slightly use a different approach. Mahesh has mentioned about the federated approach. But here we are going with a hybrid approach where we are using the operating model, which is federated and centralized, right? The data quality manager traditionally has been developed at each division or subdivision level, which we want to move out and have the centralized governance team,
Okay.
which strategizes and defines the rules which are applicable enterprisely, right? And apart from that, we have establishing the data glossary, which is having the metadata information, right, to have a unique definition of the data across. And hopefully, please stop me if I'm running out of the time. But,
we are actually a little bit over time, but I'll probably come back to that. Come back to you at the end. So that's fine. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Jim.
So Minakshi, very quickly, if you can probably in the next 2 minutes answer about what are you doing, a couple of specific steps on data quality improvement issues, as well as things such as how are you treating privacy concerns, the new regulations that are coming in.
Sure. So data quality, I'll quickly give a snapshot. A lot of good things that have already been told. I think the biggest challenge now is big data. 80% is really almost unstructured, right? So I think we all know how to deal with structured data from like a lot of long years now. But for unstructured data, JSON, HTML, XML, text files, images, it's very difficult to annotate and even understand how to parse this data, right? We don't have sort of any kind of off-the-shelf parsers that we can utilize across the board. So I think that's where we are having a standard process where we first convert the unstructured to parsed data. So again, we don't pick every kind of unstructured data, only those kind of data that is useful for our customer outcomes. And after we parse it, we actually then mash it up into a single view and a repository so that you're able to connect the dots both between the structured and unstructured data. So structured data is basically data that we get from enterprise systems like CRM, ERP, Salesforce, etc. Right? So it's very important to create that world map to Aparna's point as well. And then that being the first step, the second step is, it's very difficult to even assess how accurate or how consistent the data that's coming in, the unstructured data which is streaming in from our machines. It's very difficult to even have a quality check whether we are getting all the data, if we're getting 100% of the data. So what we always try to target is, let's try to have 85 to 90% of the complete set of data. And we also make sure we check the timestamp, we check for any kind of sensor outliers. We also check for noisy error codes, noisy data. And finally, we also check for some kind of zero values or constant values that are constantly occurring, right? So redundant values that you should be, again, removing. Because this is all running into terabytes and zettabytes of data. So you really don't have to get all of it. So that is one quick thing. The other one I would say from a data quality standpoint is the syntax, right? So we have business definitions with us. Again, the way we parse the data is again stored with respect to those personas and business definitions. And that is again one other way to ensure that data has some sort of accuracy check. From a completeness standpoint, the only thing for unstructured data that we're looking at is really the timestamp. We check the timestamp of when the data was originated at edge from the machines and when it's actually coming to the mount location. We are still not real time. We're sort of near real time and a batch mode. So we calculate the time difference and we make sure that we're getting the most of the streaming data in. So answering your second question here, Chiranjoy, to the data privacy. I think again, we all know the GDPR policies that are coming in Europe, also in Asian countries, California, Canada. So healthcare again is in the forefront of actually implementing all of those regulations. Apart from that, healthcare is also regulated by HIPAA. And also because you're storing the PHI data, which is the health status of an individual, right? So governed by a lot of federal laws. So what we do to address all of that is we have different instances of our cloud, again, being managed for different regions. So we have that for Europe, China, Singapore, India, and Canada today. We're already building for more regions. So you might wonder, if you're already having, say, 10 different instances across regions, how will you ever mash it up and have global products or value built? So what we do is, again, the sensitivity of the data. So whatever data actually can point back to a particular customer or a particular machine or a system ID, we try to have that only at that region's instance level. We aggregate and transform the data where some of this kind of system ID customer details are anonymized, and the rest of the transformed data is then taken to the global instance. So that is where we mash up data across all these regions and are able to have, standard products, which can say predict the downtime of a machine ahead of time or predict the part downtime of a machine. All of that is done at a global instance, but that is, again, federated and governed by our CISO teams, that none of the customer specific and none of the system specific data can flow to the global instance. Everything remains at a local instance. So transformation and aggregation is, one of the key steps we are following to ensure privacy.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And finally, to Mahesh, my question would be, especially because you have a federated structure and you are operating in different industries, and also you're primarily an India-facing business. So what are some of these, how are you preparing yourself for these governance or rather privacy changes that are happening, the new laws that are going to come in inadvertently in the next 12 months probably?
Sure, Chiranjoy. We actually operate in 60 countries around the world, right? So many world, and typically, as you think about countries in most places, particularly in data analytics, we looked at the developed countries, right? So we look at Europe and America and the laws being there, but there are privacy laws elsewhere as well, right? In developing countries across the world. If you take our own country, in India as an example, we have a bill that is called Privacy Data Protection Bill that is yet to become a law, right? And it will have very similar provisions like GDPR that will be available for Indian citizens and companies that operate out of India, right? So from our standpoint, because we operate in multiple geographies, as we mentioned, so we have to be best of breed, right? So we have to have standards that work across the board. And it all starts with understanding the privacy regulations and ensuring that your systems and IT processes are in place, and that's what we are, right? And then we take a fork, right, where there are certain things like no-brainer things, right, that one must do anyway. It just makes sense, right? And they are arrived at, I think there was a question on the poll as well, right? When we look at data analytics professionals, we think of having availability of data, but that comes with gaining the trust of the consumers that we cater to, right? And a lot of the governance laws and regulations are to improve the trust that citizens can have with the companies that they rate. So from an Uber cycle standpoint, I do believe that governance will aid the trust of the consumers that we cater to, and therefore I think it makes plain business sense to do this no-brainer pieces, right? Second are mechanics, right? There are specific nuances. A particular country for a particular industry may want to apply it in a certain way, and could be a very different case in a different country in a different industry, right? And that's where we typically wait for a bill to become a law, and then therefore we do what is necessary there, right? And more and more we are seeing that data privacy and data protection also go hand in hand, because governments, in order to take care of their own citizenry in their country, are enacting laws where components of data needs to be localized, right? So therefore we look at privacy and protection together, ultimately in the service of the consumer that we cater to, of course guided by the regulations in the individual geographies. And that goes with what data needs to be localized versus what needs to be anonymized and aggregated, that is available for technologies such as data lake to provide visibility to different geographies, and the deep learning and machine learning models to then employ an anonymized data. So that's our approach briefly.
Yeah. Thanks, Mahesh. So this is probably a good time to bring up the poll results. Aparna, do you have that?
Sure, Chiranjoy. So currently the final one, I am just curating it. It is coming out to be 90% help and 10% hinder. That's the final, which we...
Wow, that's quite a turnaround.
Yeah.
Okay,
so this conversation helped.
That's an indication that the panelists have already converted the audience a certain way. But again, just to sort of summarize of what we were doing. So ultimately, it comes down to a trade-off, right? Of data governance being a mechanism of breaking down silos, of utilizing synergies across business functions and divisions. At the same time, there are these privacy concerns. Therefore, probably we need to be putting silos for each individual customers, because ultimately the individual customer is the custodian of his or her own data. So how, I'm opening this up to the entire panel, how have you dealt with one particular situation, if you can talk about, where you had this trade-off in mind and you kind of came out with a interesting or an innovative solution?
Sure. Also, Chiranjoy, there's one more question from the audience, from Rohit.
Sure.
We hardly have any time on hand. We've already exceeded on the panel time, but I just request our eminent panelist, Chiranjoy, if you can also direct this question for the time being, which is how are we utilizing data to do predictive maintenance of critical equipments in manufacturing plants, which is directed of TVS and Pidilite. So, of course, we have our speakers from there. Rohit is asking from the audience. So, Chiranjoy, if you can also incorporate this for the final question. Thank you.
Sure. I can probably then start, right? So, and answer both Chiranjoy's and Rohit's question. The way I look at this is data governance and a lot of the control mechanisms that we have in place are like speed breakers, right? Clearly, nobody wants to be a speed breaker, but we all recognize the importance of it, particularly if you're driving around in an apartment complex, right? So that's the role that they play. And in terms of the solution, therefore, is transparency, right? And giving option for consumers to dictate how their data is used for the current product at hand and then subsequent cross sells that one may want to do, right? So that's the brief on the approach. Now to Rohit's question from the audience, we do leverage sensor data from machinery to understand the quality of the machine that makes machines, right? So we are an interesting business because our end product is also a machine, right? So we look at the quality of the machines and therefore have preventive or prediction of when a failure may happen and therefore construct our maintenance schedules accordingly. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my experience, because you asked for Pidilite, is very same. And I come from a very similar background as Mahesh does. So yeah, just say +1 to that. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to the panelists. Thanks Stresscon for arranging this. Thanks to the audience. So sort of, in order to sum up, it comes down to, creating transparency, creating value for the customer, communicating that to the customer in very clear terms of what we are taking this data for, how we are going to use it, and finally, data quality remains. So I heard Andrew Ng recently in one of the webinars say that good data is more important than big data. So that's where we are going to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our entire panel for joining us. Thank you so much, Chiranjoy. I think we need to give him kudos for curating this and moderating it so wonderfully. Thank you so much, Chiranjoy, for that. And to all our eminent panelists for giving in your suggestions, your answers, so that all our audience members could understand the entire conversation so wonderfully put. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Chiranjoy. Thanks, Bhavna. Thanks, panelists.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Pleasure. All the best.